In the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, after the meeting between Jesus and John the Baptist, Jesus spent 40 days and 40 nights fasting in the wilderness of the Judean desert.
In Jewish theology, the wilderness had a very symbolic significance. It was associated with key prophets like Elijah and Elisha. It was the place that the people wandered during their time after the Exodus. And so it has this particular significance as a place where religious spirituality is crystallized and forged. It's a place of introspection, and it's a place of divine revelation.
Although Zeffirelli filmed this scene, he later decided not to use it, and it never made the final cut. But Robert still used the opportunity to take himself off the busy film set and to find his own solitude in the wilderness.
I was finding it difficult to find anywhere where I could concentrate to get my head into the right place, if you like. So one day I borrowed a car and just headed off. I had no idea where I was going. I didn't even have a map. And drove for about, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes. And then I saw a road to the left. It just seemed to be going up the mountain. So I just drove up. And after about half an hour of driving, I ran out of road. Parked the car and got out and just went for a walk. And I found a rock and sat on this rock. And for the first time in 2 months of filming, I had silence, I had peace and quiet. You can see how important it was, because 40 years later, I remember it so vividly. I remember every moment of it. The value of it was incredible. It just lets you find your own compass, just to find your own center, if you like, which is very important. Because without being in your own center, you can't relate to anything else.
According to the New Testament, during his time in the wilderness, Jesus didn't find peace of mind. He came face to face with the devil.
When the Gospels portray Jesus being tempted by the devil in the wilderness, this is a classic confrontation of good and evil. It's the Son of God against the enemy of God.
In the Gospels, the devil is the personification of evil. Jesus speaks and argues with him as though he is a real person.
The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become a loaf of bread." Jesus answered him, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone."
In describing Satan as a real person, the Gospels are making a radical break from the traditional sense of evil in Judaism.
The devil doesn't play much of a role in the Old Testament. Really, Satan is simply the thing that stops God's purposes being worked out. So there's not really any sense of a person.
The story of the temptation may have been intended to be purely symbolic.
This is probably not a historical event. This is the Gospels telling us a story about how the beginning of Jesus' ministry is characterized by this conflict. It's a conflict that's going to run throughout his ministry.
When playing Jesus, Robert tried to incorporate this ambiguity into his performance.
Franco and I were still committed to the idea of possibly playing Jesus the man. We used the Gospels at that point with the questions being asked of Jesus, the temptations coming from Jesus himself, if you like, which I think would happen if you put yourself into a situation where you're completely on your own with nothing around.
This approach to the temptation scene may actually be closer to the way the Gospels were originally intended to be read.
The idea of a contest, inward battling against your own demons to some extent, is very much there in the Jewish scriptures and also in other pagan literature. You often have the idea that a person at the beginning of the ministry spends some time in reflection, working out what exactly the new calling means.
Ultimately, Zeffirelli ended up cutting the temptation scene from the final film. But even though it was never used, the scene would shape Robert's entire performance as Jesus.
We tried it, and when we watched this sequence, and there was a bit of a silence, and we both said, doesn't really work. And Franco looked at me and he said, no, what are we going to do? And I said, well, we've got to find a way to do it. And over the next week or so, we developed a technique of working where we didn't play the man. It was just somebody who, everybody who was watching it could paint their own picture. They could fill in the blanks, if you like.
With or without a real Satan, Jesus could have used this time in the wilderness to develop his new message. It was a message that would bring him into conflict with his own people.